On this Friday night, Florida's long road to rebuilding. The mammoth cleanup from a monster storm.
It's devastating. It's your life.
How long millions could be without electricity or clean water. And how even hurricanes have become politicized. Canada's pharmacare bill becomes a reality.
We've dreamed of making sure our healthcare system would include medication coverage.
What's covered, what's not, and what could expand the program. A hospital in Gaza on red alert. Israel's orders to evacuate.
You either arrest them or you kill them.
As the IDF escalates its attacks in the heart of Beirut. And the Nobel Peace Prize bestowed upon Japanese atomic bomb survivors. Why it's both a win and a warning about war.
Global National. Reporting tonight, Carolyn Jarvis.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. It has been 2 days of exhausting cleanup since Milton hit Florida, a state already battered by 2 hurricanes less than 2 weeks apart. Hurricane Milton is being blamed for at least 16 deaths from flooding and an unprecedented outbreak of tornadoes. And although officials say the worst-case scenario did not play out, the damage is still immense and estimated at $50 billion. Jackson Prosco begins our coverage tonight from Florida. Jackson.
Carolyn, for many people, the worst days of this disaster are still to come. Even though the storm has passed, they now face the prospect of weeks without power and water.
This is where the eye of Hurricane Milton made landfall. It's where we found residents still digging their way out from under a mountain of debris.
When the back of the storm came, that's when all the destruction came. And all these trees fell on all these power lines.
Incredibly, almost every single house we saw survived the storm. Many thought they were going to lose everything. Not everyone is so lucky. Across Florida, risky rescues are still unfolding as inland flooding swamps communities and traps people.
How many people?
Near Tampa, 8 people, including a child, had to be rescued. The water inside their house was nearly 2 meters deep. Statewide, millions of people are still without power and could be for weeks. The hum of generators is constant, leading to desperate scenes at the pumps.
We've been on the road all morning, literally for like 3 hours. Then we found this one.
In Sarasota, the line for fuel stretched for kilometers at one of the few stations open. People arrived on foot with gas cans.
50 people, maybe more. Yeah, and there's another line over there too.
In an area that has faced 3 destructive hurricanes in the last 2 years, survival is no longer enough.
Is it time for us to start looking somewhere else or not?
Residents are nearing the breaking point. Melissa Haddo wonders if the time has come to pack up and move on before the next big one.
Does it ever start to feel like it's too much?
This past one, I think, yeah. If another one is to come in the next 2 years, I think we just up and go.
Even though the most obvious dangers of the storm have now passed, there are hidden hazards like downed power lines. That's why officials are still urging people to stay in their homes. They also want them to conserve gasoline, which in some areas is now nearly impossible to find. Carolyn?
Jackson Prosco in South Sarasota, Florida. Thank you. Dramatic video captured the rescue of a fishing boat captain floating on a cooler 48 kilometers from shore after being stranded overnight during Milton's wrath. He was out on the water before the storm hit, repairing his boat, but it broke down while he was trying to return. The U.S. Coast Guard calls it a nightmare scenario for even the most experienced mariner. As Florida deals with back-to-back hurricanes, many influential politicians continue to cast doubt on scientific evidence that climate change plays a role in why storms like Hurricane Milton are intensifying. Eric Sorensen reports.
Florida is especially vulnerable to the extreme impacts from climate change, hurricanes, rising sea levels, and enormous costs.
Florida is the canary in the coal mine for climate change. It's just going to penetrate deeper into our communities, into our infrastructure, and just cause more damage.
But successive Republican governors have given no credence to climate change.
Thankfully, this was not the worst case scenario.
Everyone runs to a podium the minute that there's a hurricane coming. They put on their windbreakers, but what we're not doing is fixing the issues that are leading to stronger and bigger storms that are wreaking havoc all around the state.
It's a necessary political debate that can't get oxygen because there's so much hurricane misinformation. Donald Trump assailed Joe Biden and Kamala Harris's handling of federal emergency funds through FEMA.
They stole the FEMA money just like they stole it from a bank so they could give it to their illegal immigrants.
FEMA officials forced to refute the allegations.
Absolutely false. There has been no money at all taken from the Disaster Relief Fund to support anything other than our ability to help people.
There was a time when a Democratic president and a Republican governor worked together on relief after Superstorm Sandy. Barack Obama can hardly fathom Trump's tactics.
The idea of intentionally trying to deceive people in their most desperate and vulnerable moments. And my question is, when did that become okay?
But it gets worse. There are Republican assertions that hurricanes are somehow being geoengineered. Referring to an unnamed they, Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene posted, yes, they can control the weather. Conspiracy theories have set social media on fire.
The Congresswoman from Georgia is now saying the federal government is literally controlling the weather. We're controlling the weather. It's beyond ridiculous.
It's also a distraction from helping those in need of aid and from debating climate change in a state getting hammered by it. The politicking is discouraging for this academic.
Which is just like, who is politicizing what? It's very disheartening.
He yearns for a debate over why there are so many Category 5 storms and not who is manufacturing them. Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
Aviation giant Boeing is cutting 17,000 jobs. In a statement, Boeing CEO says the plane maker is axing 10% of its global workforce over the coming months. Boeing has been dealing with mounting quality and safety concerns and will record $5 billion in losses in its third quarter. And last month, more than 30,000 Boeing machinists walked off the job. Well, there are positive signs for Canada's economy. According to Statistics Canada, the economy added 47,000 jobs in September. 112,000 full-time jobs were created, the largest gain since May 2022. That was offset by the loss of 65,000 part-time positions. The unemployment rate fell to 6.5%. Canadians are one step closer to accessing some medication paid for by the government under its new Pharmacare plan. The law received royal assent in the Senate last night, leaving negotiations with the provinces as the final piece. As Mackenzie Gray reports, diabetes drugs and birth control will become available in the first phase of the program.
It's fragile because of the cuts.
It's Jagmeet Singh's crowning political achievement.
This has been a long dream of New Democrats since Tommy Douglas. We've dreamed of making sure our healthcare system would include medication coverage. And now, Pharmacare is the law of the land.
Becoming law Thursday night, putting in place a framework for a single-payer universal drug plan, the core of the now defunct Liberal NDP political agreement, but Canadians shouldn't expect cheap pharmaceuticals anytime soon.
We need the provinces and territories to come to the table and sign agreements with us.
Premier's enthusiasm to negotiate with Trudeau varies. British Columbia already has a memorandum of understanding with Ottawa. Alberta saying they want no part of the plan. But the health minister is confident deals can be in place with all provinces by the spring.
There's going to be a day when Canadians look back and find it unimaginable that people who needed access to essential medication didn't have it.
But Mark Holland admits that day isn't now. The new law is essentially Pharmacare Light, only covering diabetes medication and birth control. But costs for those drugs can add up. Birth control and IUDs run from $100 to $300 a year. And the 5.7 million Canadians who have diabetes can spend anywhere from $900 to $1,700 annually. Prices that would go to zero if Ottawa and the provinces can find common ground.
This legislation and the deals that may be coming may be a huge relief to people who have diabetes and to people who are having trouble affording contraceptives.
The cost, $1.9 billion over 5 years, which will rise if the NDP get their way and more drugs are added. But Jagmeet Singh wouldn't say if his party would prop up the Liberals in Parliament in exchange for better drug coverage.
Well, we're letting Justin Trudeau know right now what we want to see happen. We want to see deals signed.
While the Liberals and NDP both jockey to try and take credit for the plan, the Conservatives won't say if they support it, Carolyn, or if Pierre Poilievre would scrap any potential deals with provinces if he becomes Prime Minister.
Mackenzie Gray in Ottawa, thank you. 2 people have been arrested in a fire that killed a mother and her daughter in Old Montreal last week. The fire tore through a century-old building, killing a 43-year-old woman and her 7-year-old daughter, both from France. Another woman is still in hospital. Security footage obtained by Radio-Canada shows a person dressed in black kicking the building prior to the fire. Police have arrested an 18-year-old and a 20-year-old who are known to police and have links to organized crime. They allege one suspect threw an incendiary device that sparked the fire, and the other drove the getaway vehicle. A new catastrophe at one of Gaza's last remaining hospitals. Coming up, how Israel's evacuation order could be a death sentence for patients. In Lebanon, a third Canadian has been killed in airstrikes. Global Affairs Canada says officials are in contact with the victim's family but has not identified them. 2 other Canadians were killed last month.
My heart goes out to the family of the Canadian who was killed, to the families of everyone with loved ones in the region who are affected by the ongoing violence. We need that violence to end. We need a ceasefire in Lebanon and in Gaza.
And as the fighting intensifies between Israel and Hezbollah, it appears nowhere is safe. At least 22 people were killed in a strike on Beirut overnight, and 2 UN peacekeepers were wounded when explosions hit the agency's headquarters. Redmond Shannon reports.
Destruction and devastation in Beirut. Again, the aftermath of the deadliest Israeli airstrikes in the central area of the Lebanese capital since the escalation began last month. It's feared more victims lie in the rubble. It was horrifying, says this man. We lived through previous wars, but it was not like this. The country's prime minister asked, "Where is the humanity?" He said he spoke with US Secretary of State Antony Blinken about the urgent need for a ceasefire. Israel says its airstrikes are targeting Hezbollah militants and weapons in Beirut and across Lebanon, as are its ground invasions. Israeli video released Friday claims to show the head of its armed forces inside southern Lebanon. That's in an area the UN's UNIFIL peacekeeping force has patrolled for decades. On Friday, UNIFIL said Israeli troops fired at and injured 2 of its soldiers for the second time in 2 days. Israel says it will investigate as international criticism mounts.
We want neither the IDF nor Hezbollah to be present in our areas, and we want neither of them to be firing at our areas.
A Hezbollah spokesperson condemned what he called the international community's timid response, while threatening to ramp up the group's rocket strikes on Israeli cities. In Tel Aviv, the families of hostages gather for Yom Kippur, beginning at sunset, known as the Day of Atonement.
This year there is a lot to be sorry for. For me, personally, I lost my cousin this year, Carmel, my beautiful cousin.
The prayers focused on those who cannot gather for Judaism's holiest day of the year. Redmond Shannon, Global News, London.
The situation remains critical at 3 hospitals in northern Gaza. There are fears Israeli strikes will pummel the last functioning medical facilities there. Patients, including children in intensive care who cannot be moved, and some doctors are refusing to leave. Neethu Garcha reports.
A dire warning from doctors in Kamal Adwan Hospital, the largest one operating in northern Gaza. The hospital's head doctor telling Global News via text message the Israeli army contacted him Wednesday, telling him to evacuate the facility within 24 hours. He refuses to leave, saying it would be a death sentence for children in the intensive care unit. He said heavy overnight shelling around the hospital Thursday brought more dead bodies and patients to the hospital.
They've literally become the last bastion
hospital there.
U.S. pediatrician Dr. John Kaler was working from the hospital in March when he took these photos of bullet-riddled monitors in the neonatal intensive care unit. Kaler said past warnings to evacuate have been ignored, but fears this time will be different.
That level of resistance, I fear, won't be tolerated this time, which means there's only two mechanisms that happen. You either arrest them or you kill them.
Doctors warned Friday the hospital is running out of fuel and supplies.
Aid convoys that have been scheduled to go from the south to the north have all been stopped.
Israel has claimed Hamas uses hospitals as bases to conduct terrorist activity, which Hamas has repeatedly denied. A United Nations inquiry said it found Israel carried out a concerted policy of destroying Gaza's healthcare system, actions amounting to both war crimes and the crime against humanity of extermination.
We've had several reports also of paramedics as well as firefighters being killed.
UN officials are also warning the offensive in northern Gaza could hinder the second phase of its polio vaccination campaign set to start next week. Neetu Garcha, Global News, Vancouver.
The mighty Mekong ahead. Canada's commitment to help save one of the world's greatest rivers. A tour guide is dead and 23 people have been rescued after being trapped at an historic gold mine in Colorado. It's believed an equipment failure may be to blame. The tour group was on an elevator when it stopped at roughly the midway point, 152 meters below ground. 4 people were injured. Another tour group below was trapped for about 6 hours. The elevator was inspected and everyone was brought back to the surface. Today at the summit of Southeast Asian nations in Laos, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau met with groups working to protect the Mekong River. The river stretches nearly 5,000 kilometers, greater than the distance between Vancouver and Toronto. The challenge, the river has 160 dams. As David Aiken reports, safeguarding the river involves coordination between countries that each have a financial interest in harnessing the river's massive energy potential.
The Mekong, like many of the world's great rivers, is in trouble. A UN report out this week said river flows around the world fell to all-time lows last year.
Water is becoming the most telling indicator of our climate's distress. And yet, as a global society, we are not taking bold action to protect this resource.
Canada may not be taking bold action, but it is taking some action. On Friday, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, with his son Hadrian by his side, announced some modest funding, $2 million over 3 years, to help the Mekong River Commission, which is a multilateral agency that helps manage this crucial resource.
Canada's glad to participate, but managing shared water is going to be more and more important. Very complex, but also so important.
The Mekong yields 2 million tons of fish a year. It's the biggest inland fishery in the world, and that fish is an irreplaceable protein in the diet of tens of millions in Vietnam, Cambodia, Thailand, and Laos. But because of overdevelopment, too many dams, there are huge conservation challenges. As many as 1/5 of the fish species in the Mekong are at risk of extinction.
The good news is that the problems facing the Mekong River system are not irreversible. They can be resolved, and the organization that the Government of Canada is helping to fund, the Mekong River Commission, will be right at the heart of meeting that challenge. David Aiken, Global News, Vientiane, Laos.
A great white shark was found dead, washed up on Haida Gwaii on BC's north coast. Great whites in BC waters are rare. The Department of Fisheries and Oceans says this shark was more than 4 meters long and had been feeding on a seal. A prize for peace to survivors of war. The winners of the Nobel Prize. Next. They endured one of the most horrific acts of war ever committed. And today, a group of survivors of the atomic bombings in Japan received the highest honor for peace. The grassroots organization won the Nobel Peace Prize for its work advocating for a world without nuclear weapons. As Mike Armstrong explains, the award is meant as more than a commendation, but also a warning about the consequences of war.
The nominees were known.
Good morning, everyone.
As the announcement was made in the Norwegian capital, while the eventual winners were following in Hiroshima, Japan. The group, Nihon Hidankyu, is led by a survivor himself. The first reaction, disbelief. It can't be real, he said. Nihon Hidankyu was established 11 years after atomic bombs were dropped on Nagasaki and Hiroshima. It was survivors banding together to create a voice. The Nobel Committee says the survivors, through their stories and pain, have described the indescribable and helped the world grasp the incomprehensible.
It is worth reminding ourselves what nuclear weapons are. The most destructive weapon the world has ever seen.
In Japan, one of the country's largest papers issued a special edition Friday sharing the news. Next year will mark the 80th anniversary of the bombings. The hope is the group's anti-nuclear weapons message is amplified. This woman was overcome by emotions. Now, the average age of remaining survivors is 85. The burden of carrying their message has moved to their children and grandchildren. But it is, according to the Nobel Committee, more important than ever.
Today, this taboo against the use of nuclear weapon is under pressure.
The committee is pointing at rhetoric from Russia about using nuclear weapons and efforts by other countries to build them. Modern weapons, it says, are much more powerful than the ones used by the U.S. in the Second World War and would kill millions.
A nuclear war could destroy our civilization.
The committee says the award is meant to cultivate hope and engagement for peace, as well as to honor survivors before they're gone. Mike Armstrong, Global News, Montreal.
And that is Global National for this Friday night. I'm Carolyn Jarvis. Tonight's Your Canada is a montage of the northern lights that dazzled in the sky across the country last night. We love seeing Your Canada. Please email it to globalnational@globalnews.ca. Thanks for watching. Hope you'll join us again tomorrow night. Have a great night.